it appears in another interesting story that we are tracking that India's per capita income is going to grow 70% by 2030. Now, this of course is a report, but that is great big news. What are we looking at in terms of per capita income? How much is an average Indian likely to earn?
Right, Shweta. So, this is of course a report that has come by Standard Chartered Bank, and they have come with their forecast for 2030, which is turn of this decade. Now, 2030 is a big, headline calendar year that we are discovering in practically every report, every news item, every announcement, whether it is Prime Minister Modi, whether it is Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, whether it is, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Union Minister. I think overall 2030 is this one target year, which is attracting a lot of interest. And this latest Standard Chartered report that comes in squarely suggests that India's per capita GDP is likely to go up almost 70% from about $2,450 per annum right now to about $4,000. And this of course comes again on the back of multiple South Indian states which are right now the largest per capita GDP holders, being offset even by the likes of states like Haryana and Gujarat. In fact, the report suggests that Gujarat is going to actually dominate this figure of 4,000 and above of per capita GDP.
No surprises there.
Yeah, right now Gujarat doesn't figure in the top 5. Right now the top 5, as we are seeing in the graphics on the screen right now, are the likes of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, right? And these are states which are right now in the vicinity of about $3,000 per person, the per capita GDP. Whereas the larger, more populous states like Uttar Pradesh, like Maharashtra, like Bihar, like Jharkhand, like Rajasthan, continue to be well below this $2,450 per annum as far as the per capita GDP goes. Now, the Standard Chartered report, of course, comes on the back of 2030 as the year by which the per capita GDP should have averaged out to about $4,000. This on account of the Indian economy having grown to levels in excess of $6 trillion. Now, of course, we all have seen that $5 trillion was the target for for India to have reached the GDP by 2022, but then we saw a slightly lowered growth rate at about 6% between 2017 2018, and then we had the COVID-19 situation in 2020, which lasted till about 2021 or so. So we haven't been able to reach the $5 trillion GDP mark yet, but this report from Standard Chartered suggests that we will be well in excess of $6 trillion by 2030. And what I'm most bullish about is that a chunk of this, a large degree of this GDP is actually going to be consumption driven. Right now, consumption and export driven. Consumption and export driven, right? I'm more excited about the consumption story because right now, reports suggest that 57% of the GDP is consumption driven. But we have almost half the population, which is the rural segment of the population, not contributing as much to the consumption story as the urban population is. Now, add to this, government spend on infrastructure, capital expenditure that the government has spent has been able to foster this GDP growth for India. But consumption story growing with a growing middle class, and India's middle class, again, as per another report published by Price, suggests that we'll have a billion strong middle class by 2030. So the consumption story, escaping poverty, moving into middle class, consuming, and if that consumption is going to drive the $6 trillion of GDP growth, then I think we are definitely in a very comfortable position, because that story will only get augmented further and further in the positive territory, and that will reduce the burden on the government to do the heavy lifting as far as the GDP growth is concerned. Now, the second bucket, of course, is exports, and the report seems fairly bullish that India is going to become an export-centric economy. Right now, of course, we are heavily dependent on imports because of our fuel needs. And if the progression from fuel to alternate energy, electric vehicles, etc., moves as projected and as per target, then India's opportunity to reduce its import dependence and become an export-centric economy does what it did for, let's say, China's economy. China became an export-centric economy. Japan became an export-centric economy. So we should be able to follow that path and reduce our oil dependence and hence the dollar outgo that the Indian economy sees and receive more dollar income when it comes to exports.
Okay.
So that is what the report is suggesting.
My concern with exports is also driven by a lot of external factors, primarily the consumption in Western markets that we are looking to cater to. And given the economic sort of gloom and doom, in the way which we started this year, from World Bank to IMF predicting that global economies, developed economies rather, are going to not be performing as good as expected, maybe a recession, and that is what we are seeing, remnants of that and recession in many Western markets. Given all these factors and Ukraine war, Russia-Ukraine conflict continuing, disruption in global supply chain, a lot of India's exports is going to depend on that demand. And if that demand doesn't come through, no matter how much we manufacture, exports will remain low.
No doubt about that, Shweta. We are living in an interconnected world. We are living in a situation where, you are dependent on your Eastern and Western partners, both for import and export. You are still an economy and a global economy which is linked to the US dollar. So a lot of that would change, if not transform, by the time we reach 2030. But to believe and assume that we will be isolated from every global event is going to be foolhardy. So we will continue to be dependent on the global macroeconomics. We will continue to be dependent on the global geopolitical environment. And in light of that, I think, there's always a black swan event that cannot be predicted, and hence it's called a black swan, right? In a sea full of swans, you can't really predict that one of the swans is going to turn out to be black. They're usually white. And hence, the black swan events like the COVID or like another war may not be easy to take into account right now for anybody crystal ball gazing with some data and research towards an event 7 years from now, 2030 being 7 years from now. But yeah, there could be these one-off events that could mar the overall economic sentiment. But primarily to forecast a report right now, I think it takes all conditions met, ceteris paribus, nothing changes, and hopefully a resolution to the global supply chain issue, hopefully a complete and definitive end to the pandemic, no new pandemic emerging. I think keeping that ceteris paribus, all conditions equal sort of a situation, the forecast of $4,000 as per capita GDP on back of India's growth to a $6 trillion economy, the third largest in the world, and on account of course, a lot of more number of Indians escaping poverty, swelling the middle class, fostering consumption, and the thrust that we are seeing from a policy standpoint right now on incentivizing manufacturing, on incentivizing, exports which are going to be relevant for the future, whether you talk about semiconductors or electronics or automobiles or even smartphones and gadgets. I think any sort of, any industry which looks at the future and not just at a present, and which is where the incentives are being attached right now, should see us through as per, not just as per the report, but as per normal macroeconomic theory.
All right, but I think a downer that we're getting from this report, something not to cheer, is the fact that states that account for about 25% of Indian population, including Bihar, UP, their per capita income will remain $2,000 even by 2030, which essentially points towards a growth story which is unequal and uneven, if I may say so.
So, Shweta, I think we need to look at, any projection will get averaged out. The point is that India, if it reaches a $6 trillion economy figure by 2030, it's not that every state has grown in equal measure. I think which is where you need that corporate federalism, cooperative federalism and competitive federalism, statements made famous by late Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, to actually get the states to compete with each other, get this federal architecture to compete within the larger secular unit of India, to be able to foster growth for their particular constituencies. Now, which is what this report states, that right now, even though the top 5 highest per capita GDP states happen to be in South India, that is not going to be reality in 2030. Okay. In fact, Gujarat as a state, as per the report, is likely to be much higher than $4,000 per annum per person. Right. So Gujarat, because of its lucrative policy framework, ease of doing business, the focus on international and domestic industries to be set up, will continue to bear results in 2030. But on the 5th spot is likely to be the state of Haryana, which is also squarely in the middle of this same Bimaru belt, high population belt of UP and Bihar, but with cities like Gurugram, with cities like Sonipat, with cities like Faridabad, which have been trying to attract investments and set up employment centers, corporate offices, etc., are going to start contributing more and will start the state GDP grows, and hence the number of people you employ, you pay them salaries, it averages out to a state like Haryana. Whereas if states like Uttar Pradesh, like Bihar, like Jharkhand, like Rajasthan, if they don't move with the same agility as states like Tamil Nadu, like Gujarat, like Haryana, then they will obviously fall back, and hence their sort of proportion of more poverty-stricken people will continue to be larger than those of the states which become more progressive in their overall climate for investment to be set up in their states.
Okay, so I think I'm assuming the responsibility squarely lies with the Bimaru states, as we call them, including likes of UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, where the onus essentially will be on them to start competing with their southern partners and perhaps grow at a similar pace, at a similar clip as many of your South Indian and West Indian peers. I'm assuming, and this is with my limited understanding of geography, is also that, given where they are placed, these are landlocked states, the opportunities become limited. And I'm not a big believer of, we are in a quasi-federal, country, but I'm not a big believer of socialism. However, I also believe that the onus also lies somewhere with the central government to provide as much assistance as they can by the way of revenues that you give, the money that you allocate to various states,
so
specifically
I think
these states.
Every state in its bid tries to attract investments.
Absolutely.
We've seen investor
and
conclaves being done in UP.
Conclave did get a lot of traction for that matter from investors.
Is that a lot of MOUs get signed. A lot of lip service is met out that, hey, yeah, we are going to invest 1,000 crores, 1,500 crores, 2,000 crore rupees worth of investment, but then something slips through the cracks. And that slippage, I think, has to be checked at the level of the states. But having said that, of course, states cannot work in a completely different policy architecture as the center.
Right.
But the point is, states still have enough autonomy to be able to make their own land acquisition a little easier for companies who want to come and do business in those states, right? Similarly, I think you will have to look at models from other states who have been able to tinker policies to attract investments and have been able to actually go beyond the MOU stage and get real investments, real foundation stones, real factories up and running. So if they've been able to do it, I think other states will have to follow suit. Now, there could be states which are landlocked.
Which is where I think an example of Haryana comes into picture.
Absolutely. I was just going to talk about Haryana. Haryana is also as landlocked as it gets, right? But Haryana has still been able to at least attract corporate offices. You need not set up a full-fledged factory which requires water, which requires a lot of labor, which requires access to raw material through shipping lines, etc. But you could still have, or even Uttar Pradesh for that matter, Uttar Pradesh is fairly landlocked, except you have a passage of the Yamuna running, but it's hardly a river right now except for the monsoons when it rose a little, but I'm pretty sure it's going to dry out in no time. But again, I think states will have to emulate what other states are doing. We'll have to compete in the spirit of federalism and try to have this attitude of one-upmanship, try to have this attitude that we want to win elections on the basis of employment and investment coming into the state, and we want to have our state in the top rung of GDP contributors to the nation. Right. And if it's done in that spirit, then I think, yeah, that pecking order could very well change by 2030.
Absolutely. I suppose that's the only way to go about it if that order were to change. But good news there overall. A report from Standard Chartered that points to India's growing per capita income, which is more money in people's hands, which is more money that you can spend, and greater income means greater spending. All of that, of course, is going to augur well, specifically for southern states that are likely to grow at a faster clip as opposed to northern states. We will bring you updates on that story.